Hi class, welcome to Module 5. Module 5 is on marriage and cohabitation, and our book addresses these together. We're going to kind of divide them up. We have 2 weeks for this module, so we'll start with the first of the video with cohabitation as we look at it. The question is, who needs marriage? We may not need it, but we may want it. But fewer people marry today, percentage-wise, than in the past, which is a significant change in society. And this module covers that as we start looking at the changing society. I think the interesting point is before you even start with some of this information, you might want to take a look at the video from Andrew, and I'll probably kill his name, Cherlin. He's a sociologist and he's written a number of books. I don't always agree with his position. Met him and talked to him a few times at the Eastern Sociology Conference and the American Sociology Conference. But he does look at the percentages and why things have changed so directly related to cohabitation. So I think you'll find that very short video interesting. He's also quoted in our textbook in a number of places, including this chapter, as you start thinking about what changes and the research he's done. But let's hop over to the PowerPoints and talk about the beginning PowerPoints in this chapter. So marriage is often postponed in this society. It's optional, but it's still highly valued. There still is this call to be married, even though there is not such the social need as there was in the past. And there's a tension between the culture of marriage and the culture of individualism. And throughout this chapter, the author even states that she ties so many things to the issues of divorce as well and why cohabitation comes into place. What's interesting to think about related to cohabitation, in the 1980s, when cohabitation was listed as cohabitation, and we weren't just calling it common law marriage in those situations, we started doing research. Now think about this. This was under the Reagan administration. And we start looking at this and we see all the problems that cohabitation creates. And the research is very negative on cohabitation. Move forward 20 years to 2000, and the research on cohabitation is a lot more positive as we start looking at it. Now, social science relies on research, but remember that it's also influenced by the time and the culture that comes into place. Today, when we look at cohabitation, we're looking at it at a much more sociological imagination level, that we're looking to find answers about it and not making assumptions and not trying to put that preconceived notion, especially related to sorry about that, religious issues and other things. So as we talk about cohabitation, we'll see why it's become more prevalent. Now, it's not just with the young. The increase of cohabitation is significantly shown in older adults as well. And there's multiple reasons, and the social issues are pretty powerful that show why older adults are more likely to cohabitate. Well, think about it. They're not in the process of having more children. So to having children, which is often a reason for marriage, is not why they would get married. One of the other issues becomes a financial issue. And who owns what property and whose children inherit what. If I marry, then my children lose in that process. My spouse inherits, not my children, unless I carefully protect that. And another major issue, and we can see the societal pressures here for cohabitation, is if I marry, then I lose my benefits under my husband's retirement plans, including Social Security. I would have to change to something else and possibly at a lower dollar. So as you think about cohabitation, don't just think of younger adults in the process, but think about society as a whole. Younger adults are much more likely to cohabitate than in the past. Even years ago, when my daughter moved in with her boyfriend, I told her she wanted to know how I felt about cohabitation, which would not have been acceptable in my time period as easily it was in hers. And I said, we all make our own mistakes. It was she reminds me of to this day, and they've been married 17 years since then. So important things to consider. Ideal types of marriage. We're going to be coming back to marriage later, but there were ideal types based on the historical component. Pre-industrial issue, it was a necessity. It was a social regulation. It wasn't built on romantic love. Divorces were rare and they were very difficult to come by. We'll talk about divorce law in the next chapter, in the next module, but divorces were rare and men had the right to divorce and women did not. Women usually could only divorce if their husbands deserted them, where men could divorce if a wife didn't keep her house clean or they thought they were crazy or all sorts of things, that there were power issues in play. So we look at the societal issues, and it was a patriarchal system. The man was in control, the law put him in control, and he stayed in control. In the late 1900s to the late 20th century, the ideal type of marriage was a compassionate type of marriage with emotional ties between spouses, gender-specific roles, and it led to the rise in divorce. We think that, the liberalization of the divorce laws were part of the issue, but the changing society comes into places which creates that liberalization of the divorce laws. Now, currently in the late 20th century and today, we look at marriage for personal fulfillment, high expectation of that soulmate. Who's the perfect person for me? My husband once gave me a Valentine's Day card that said that I was his soulmate, and I gagged. If there's only one soulmate out there for me, how am I going to find it? But we do expect this bonding relationship that comes into place, that we're tied together. And because when this fails, it leads to even higher divorce rates as we start exploring it. So let's begin by looking at cohabitation. And first, how do we get partnered? Now, your textbook does not have these particular information, but let's talk about it. We fall in love. There is this period of love. In the past, when we looked at love, the ancient Greeks and Roman mythology did not associate love with marriage. You can go back to those ideal types of marriage and see that. And early Christianity did not associate love with marriage. In fact, in Paul, it says for a woman to respect her husband, not love him, and follow his command. Only a man was ordered to love his wife from the Bible when we're looking at that. In the Middle Ages, there was this 12th century, there were some precursors to our notion of love, but by the 19th century, we get this feminization of love, that it's romantic, it comes into place, it's very Victorian. We start getting this process of the association that love with private work of women at home, and we start seeing that division of family. Now, family is going to look different. Marriage is going to look different prior to this time period. And part of this is also tied to that industrialization period. But how do we fall in love? What are the top 10 features of love? Well, here are from 1988. Think about this. From 1988, is it still the same today? Do you see anything missing here? What happened to romance? But the features of love are trust, care, honesty, friendship, respect, desire to promote the other's well-being, loyalty, commitment, acceptance of others without wanting to change the other, support, desire to be in each other's company, and consideration and interests in each other. Missing romance, isn't it? Features of love. We see that passion. So, when we survey people, 1988, we find this is the concept of love. Does it fit today? Start asking yourself, how do we fall in love? How do we know we're in love? But once we're in love, there's a lot of theories out there of love. Now, Steinberg has a theory of love, and I bring up his theory because I think it's important for us to think about it, that love has multiple levels that come into place. He conceptualized love as a process in three interconnecting components: passion, intimacy, and commitment. And we place different emphasis on all three of these elements throughout our lives because love is a process that undergoes change. Now, does that stay in effect today with the changing society? Those are things that you need to continue to question throughout this whole thought about how we end up with someone. Our process is not always this equilateral triangle, isn't it? There are times that commitment is especially more powerful in holding us in place. And without that piece of commitment, we just have a straight line, and we can see the delusion of love, the dissolving of that feeling. So his theory really looks at how these tie together and how they hold us in that loving relationship and how we choose to be together. Now, there's multiple types of love as we look forward, and these are considered the 6 areas of love, and they're very, very different. Eros is that passion, that strong physical attraction that we have for one another comes into place. You walk in the room, love at first sight, that strong physical attraction. And then storge, the companion, that mutual love, that trust and respect. And pragma, the practical and sensible level of love. And then ludus, the playful, carefree, casual, and agape. We often say God's love is agape. If you believe in God, that altruistic, laying down your life for someone, that kind, that patient love. And then the mana, that's the possessive, intensive, the jealousy love that comes into place, that can be very harmful and becomes obsessive. So when you think about love, why we end up in these relationships, we could end up by all of these levels of love, or just one or two, and how they pull into that place. Now, I want to give you one more theory that our author doesn't give us. The theory of Rhesus, and his theory, Ira, describes love as an ongoing process that unfolds in 4 stages, similar to a rolling wheel. And the stages may be experienced many times, going backwards and forwards, that you need a number of things to come into place to be successful. That personal need for fulfillment, the rapport. We'll talk about communication later at a deeper level, how important it is in that marital relationship, how it comes into place, and that marriage can survive if you have rapport and you're able to communicate. The openness of a person for self-revelation is an important piece of that. Can you give up of yourself enough that you're not just laying down your life for someone else, but you self-reveal and share things that you would share with no one else, and yet they don't turn that into harm, and there's that mutual dependency that comes into place. There may be physical mutual dependency, but the dependency is, I want to share this with someone I really care about. So how we experience love varies, and we find that men are more likely than women to be in or looking for committed relations. Men report falling in love sooner and with more people than women do, and men are more preoccupied with love than women, which is totally unbelievable when we think about all those romance novels and those chick flicks that girls watch. And yet when we do survey work and we do interactions and research, it's important to know that love and the need to be loved is held by both men and women as we look at that. It's interest in love. Men appear to be more interested in love and a committed relationship than women do. And so we'll look at this particular statistic, and you've noticed this is from 2006, so much more in line with what we're talking about. But falling in love, making that determination that you want to be together, is an important part to consider before we move into looking at cohabitation and what's going on with it. There has been a rapid rise in cohabitation in the 20th century versus the late 20th century versus the early 20th century or the 19th century. But go back further and we find that the majority of relationships were cohabitation for multiple reasons historically. There may not have been the access to church. There may not have been other reasons, and culture itself. You lived together. It depended on your cultural background. Almost 2/3 of women cohabitate before their first marriage today. And 3/4 of new residential unions are cohabitation, and only 1/4 are marriages. And so, for many of you in this class, you've lived in a situation where you've cohabitated with that significant other, no matter what that relationship, whether it be heterosexual or homosexual. This is a pattern that comes into place as we are now accepting as a society to see that exists. Now, remember that I told you older adults too cohabitate. And so that they may stay in that cohabitation relations. And there's significantly wide approval for that, especially in the United States, though it's not universal. And think about how culture comes into play as we start looking into place. So approval of cohabitation has definitely gone up. So from the time that my daughter was cohabitating, which was in between this area here, as she was in her senior year in college, there has been a significant increase as far as acceptance. And look how it varies by age. And notice 2012, the most recent, our text gives us within that the older adult population, we're talking 65 plus, 34% now agree versus that 9% in the past. So a rapid change as we see the changes. So cohabitation, who cohabitates? More common among the less educated and lower income. It is where it works in those situations, moving in together. It's uncommon among most strong religious groups and those with traditional gender ideas. In other words, that fact that a woman's job is to take care of the home, a man's job is to make that living. Younger people are more likely, but fast growing in the older generations as well, as we see the cohabitation coming into place. And there are social issues to do. Sometimes it's cheaper to live together than be apart. And you'd rather be with that significant other in your life, that person that you're in the process of dating or building that relationship with. So this is significant as we look at these trends. Now, cohabitation's second trend is why live together. The diversity among cohabitators, and that cohabitation becomes part of that dating stage. It's a step towards marriage. It's an alternate to marriage. Oftentimes, it may be all three of those. We're trying to see how things work. We are already dating, or we're dating, with benefits. And so why not cohabitate? It's the different view of our relationship in life and what's acceptable in society. It gives us that emotional closeness and that shared expense, and that economic piece comes into play. One of the third reasons in the trends for cohabitation is relationships. Fewer marry than in the past, and cohabitations are relatively short-term, but long-term among poor women oftentimes, and then we'll have serial cohabitators. You leave one cohabitation relationship and enter another and share that, and you move through that process. So we're seeing this big change in culture as these trends move forward. And, the question is, back to the beginning, when you think about where we started from, do we need marriage? We need marriage because it gives us that legal piece, but in reality, does it tie us any closer together? So the trends for cohabitation, when we look at the force, is the increasing risk of divorce. Cohabitation doesn't put in that high cost of marriage, but it doesn't put in the high cost of divorce at the same time. And so recent research shows that the link is explained by young people and their relationship formation, and relationship has weakened as cohabitation has become commonplace. And so we see that changing event that comes in place. Now, cohabitation can lead to multiple situations out there, the sharing, the building of a home, and there is significant childbirth within cohabitation. And we see that the births to unmarried women, right, are much higher with less high school education. High school education and some college. Those with college degrees are less likely to have a birth outside of marriage. Now, birth outside of marriage here is not just during cohabitation, but it could be through dating relationships or even choices that come into place. And this again is changing as we come into place, that we see actually teenage pregnancies dropping within our country, which is pretty significant, except in rural areas like we're in. So there is this whole issue of non-marital fertility. But let's say we've gotten together, right? We've gotten out there and we've decided that this person is the person I love. We've cohabitated. We've decided we're going to get married. Well, when Andrew Chinden talks about it, he talks about how important marriage now becomes. It's a celebration of people making that commitment. That's part of what you're doing in this module. So, as I told you, I will divide this into 2 videos, and I'm going to bring you back to the course material here. You have a quick look at a history of marriage, a very short ones, and that's where I want you to go to as you start thinking about that. I'm actually going to move that good wife down further as we look at the chapter on marriage. But what happens marriage law-wise and what's in place? Now you've decided to marry that person. Let's plan the wedding. What are you going to do? Well, think about it. Marriage today is a real celebration of going beyond that cohabitation. Think about the societal issues that come together. Who you're marrying? Are they of the same ethnic and racial background as you? Your religion. Do you want married in a church? Are you tied to religion? What brings you in place? What type of ceremony do you want? What comes into place? What social pressures? Are your parents pressuring you for marriage? What brings you to those processes? The first discussion for this module is not a newspaper article. It is about you planning a wedding. And you'll find that you have a wedding planner here. If you link to it, you'll see that you will get directly to your download here, which is available under course materials as well, and you download your wedding planner. The wedding planner is an Excel spreadsheet for you to start thinking about what goes into place in forming a wedding budget. And it kind of covers all sorts of information. What I need in place, what brings me. As you prepare your wedding, I want you to be able to describe who you're marrying, what's about them, what goes into place, and put together your actual planned ceremony. So what's your estimated wedding ring value? Most wedding rings today will run about $1,000. And you start filling these in as you evaluate that. Estimated and actual. For you in class, you're actually going to only need to put your estimated and actual of what it comes into place. But I want you to determine how much you're actually going to spend over the length of time on some of these. What comes into place? Plan your wedding. So your project for this week is to read through cohabitation and decide that you're going to get married and look at the social indicators that bring you together. Plan your wedding. What do your costs come from? Okay, so let's move back to the module. we can get there. There we go. So as I said, I'm going to do some reorganization here, but you'll find that your first discussion will be of the wedding planner. The discussion of the wedding planner is due on 10/1. For the final part of the discussion, obviously your first part of the discussion is to be put up prior to that on the Wednesday, but then you can start your new thread and describe what brought you to make the decisions related to your wedding. So if you read the directions here, if for Module 5 you've been asked to plan your wedding, dream of whatever you would like, what problems would arise, what are the costs, what help you determine what type of wedding you want, and think about all those sociological issues. After you've posted them, then read and comment just like on any other module discussion board. With that, we stop the first week, and I will have a second video on marriage.